You can order the radiator used in the video on the CarParts.com website via the link in the description. Turn off your engine and set the parking brake. Pull on the hood release handle and open the hood. For safety reasons, we advise you to disconnect the battery. To do so, we recommend watching the video, How to Replace the Ford F150 Car Battery. Get a fluid collection container to collect the coolant that will flow out. On this vehicle, the radiator is equipped with the bleed screw, which you access from the underside of the vehicle on the passenger side. Connect a plastic tube to the bleed port to collect the coolant directly in the collection container. You can then unscrew the bleed screw to let the coolant flow. To facilitate the flow of coolant, open the cap of the coolant expansion tank. Remove the breather from the air intake duct by pushing the green tab and pulling on the breather. Using a flathead screwdriver, unscrew the two clamps located on either side of the duct. Then, remove the duct. Next, using a pair of adjustable pliers, compress the retaining ring of the coolant hose, which is connected to the radiator. Then, remove the hose. Using a 10mm wrench, unscrew the 4 screws holding the fuse box. Then, remove them. Using a fork, remove the retaining clip from the electrical harness on the fan. Using a flathead screwdriver, unclip the air conditioning fluid hose from the radiator. Using the fork, unclip the electrical harness from the power steering fluid reservoir retaining screw. Using a ratchet, an extender, and an 11mm socket, unscrew the retaining screw of the power steering fluid reservoir. Then, remove the reservoir and set it aside so that it doesn't get in your way during the next steps. Using a flathead screwdriver, unclip the cooling hose retainer ring. Then, remove the hose. Hey, it's Alex from CarParts.com. If you enjoyed this video and want to support us, like, comment, and subscribe. Okay, back to work. Using the fork, remove the harness retaining clip under the fuse box support. Repeat the same operation with the harness on the fan next to the battery. Using the flathead screwdriver, lift the tab that secures the passenger side radiator fan connector. Do the same on the driver's side. Then unclip the harness located next to the fan on the driver's side. You can now shift over the fuse box assembly on the engine in order to have the space needed to remove the fan assembly. Using a ratchet and an 8mm socket, unscrew the 2 screws holding the fan assembly to the radiator. You can now remove the fan assembly. Using the flathead screwdriver, remove the locking clip securing the air duct to the radiator. Then, remove the duct by jiggling it back and forth. Remove the radiator cap. Then, remove the overflow hose. Next, using a Phillips screwdriver, unscrew the plastic rivet from the rubber cover next to the headlights. Remove the 2 clips from the rubber cover using the fork. Then, take off the cover. Do the same on the other side. On the driver's side, you now have access to the upper hose, which you can remove using a pair of adjustable pliers. Before carrying out the same operation with the lower hose, place a collection container under it, as coolant will flow out. spray the 2 radiator retaining screws with penetrating oil. Then unscrew them on the engine side using a ratchet and a 13mm socket. Unclip the air conditioning radiator from the radiator by pulling on the 2 plastic tabs located on either side of the radiator, then pulling them out. Then, lift the air conditioning radiator to remove the 3 lugs from the retaining brackets. There is 1 lug on the driver's side and 2 lugs on the passenger side. Before the radiator can be removed, the airbox coolant expression tank assembly must be removed. Disconnect the airflow meter connector. Then, using a ratchet and a 13mm socket, unscrew the 2 screws holding the airbox. You can now lift the airbox expansion tank assembly to disengage it from the retaining silent blocks, being careful to remove the air intake duct from the fender's inner lining. If you want to know which tools and parts we use in this video, just check the description and you'll find everything you need. You can now lift the radiator to free the 2 rubber insulators at the bottom of the radiator and extract it via the passenger side. You can order the radiator used in the video on the CarParts.com website via the link in the description. It comes with 2 rubber insulators and 2 speed nuts. Install them on the new radiator. You can now install the new radiator by sliding it in through the passenger side and passing it under the air conditioning hose. Then, shift the air conditioning hose to the other side of the radiator. You can purchase the parts we used here by visiting our website at CarParts.com. From the front of the vehicle, lift the air conditioning radiator in order to clip the 3 lugs onto the retaining brackets of the new radiator. Then, reclip the 2 upper tabs on the new radiator. You can now put the radiator assembly in its final position by inserting the 2 rubber insulators into their slots. You can now tighten the 2 screws holding the radiator. Using a pair of adjustable pliers, put the 2 hoses on the driver's side back in place on the radiator. Replace the rubber covers next to the headlights and reclip them. Replace the clip on the air duct. Then reclip the air duct to the radiator. You can now slide the fan assembly onto the radiator. Then, screw the 2 retaining screws back in. Replace the fuse box assembly on its support. Reclip the various harnesses and reconnect the 2 fan power connectors. Fasten the cooling hose back in its housing. Then reconnect it to the radiator using the adjustable pliers. Reclip the air conditioning fluid hose. Replace the power steering fluid reservoir. Then, retighten the reservoir's retaining screw. Reclip the harness on the reservoir's retaining screw. You can now tighten the 4 screws of the fuse box assembly. Reinstall the airbox expansion tank assembly. Then, screw the 2 retaining screws back in. Reconnect the overflow hose. Then, put the old radiator cap back on the new radiator. Reconnect the battery. Replace the air intake duct. Screw the 2 clamps back on. Replace the breather. Now you need to refill the radiator with coolant and purge any air from the circuit. To do this, we recommend that you watch our video, How to Perform a Coolant Flush on a Ford F150. The video also shows how to expel air from the circuit when refilling it. Operation complete.